Hello, everyone. Once again, this is your instructor, Vernon Creviston. I'm coming to you again with a new video. This one kind of changing focus a little bit from where we've been the past couple of lectures. In the last two or three lectures, I've been focusing on kind of these rising differences between these different regions of the country, the North and the South, trying to explain how Southerners are kind of starting to identify and kind of use slavery as kind of a centrally defining feature of their society, their version of American culture. Whereas the North, it's starting to change and kind of respond to these big changes in Northern life of industrialization, rising urban centers, and of course, immigration. And that kind of spurs them to act in a different way. And we've kind of talked about that in the last couple of lectures, okay? So today what we're going to do is talk about kind of what happens kind of coterminously with this stuff, what's happening at the same time, kind of in a bigger scale. We're going to kind of return to politics a little bit more today, a little bit of international relations, and of course, for the first time in a long time, the United States is going to go to war with another country. Remember, the last time the United States really went to war with somebody besides indigenous American natives, right? Is going to be officially with a neighboring country, a neighboring republic of all things, a country kind of based on a lot of American ideals, and that, of course, is Mexico. And to kind of explain why the United States kind of goes to war with a neighboring nation that it really doesn't have a lot of problems with, we have to kind of understand some of these big influences, these big factors that are at play, right? Because there is something here in the 1830s, 40s, and even into the early 1850s that can really bring a lot of Americans together. Something that they can kind of agree on, whether they're a northerner or a southerner. And that's that the nation should get bigger, right? Americans from the very beginning, from the moment they were colonists from Europe, they've been pushing westwards, taking land from natives, really from anybody that stood in their way. Well, that hasn't gone anywhere here in the 19th century. And Americans are still wanting to push the boundaries of their country, make it bigger, expand their way of life, if you will, grab additional resources, and of course, the economic opportunities that come with those resources. So that's kind of what today's lecture is about, is how all of this kind of fits together and how we see some of those problems we talked about in the last few lectures kind of still laying there, waiting, kind of really kind of deepening the fractures, kind of while there's kind of this pace, this kind of solve over the top that is really not really dealing with these problems that we've kind of illuminated here. So today what we're going to kind of do is turn our attention to this expansion of the country, what a lot of people at the time call manifest destiny. This idea that the United States should just get bigger. It has a divine mission, if you will. It's inspired by God, kind of ordained by God, and that the Americans really do need to expand this nation. How far to expand it is maybe the only thing that Americans might disagree on. Some are saying everywhere. Some are saying, just a little bit further. Most are saying at least get to the Pacific Ocean, get all the way across the continent. So here during this period, we're going to talk about the expansion of this country, something again that's been going on since the very beginning this country was created, and of course what that entails, right? What that means, which of course is going to mean war, because a lot of that land that the United States sees as its destiny actually belongs to other places, part of the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, and eventually even the nation of Mexico. So let's kind of start this investigation, this kind of look at this period with a painting, right? It's done by an American artist by the name of Jonathan Gass, and it's actually done in the 1870s after the Civil War. But he is kind of hearkening back to these ideas from before the Civil War, of this divine mission. And if you kind of look at this painting, there's a lot of what this idea of manifest destiny is kind of wrapped up in it. Now, of course, the central figure here is a woman floating above everything, and it very much has a lot of religious overtones. But it really, while yes, it is a religious kind of angelic figure, it really is an epitomizes America, if you will, right? You can tell that by the star that's on the head, on the forehead of the woman, right? So while she is kind of in an angelic form, floating above everything, right? We can see that it's really Lady Liberty that Jonathan Gass is trying to tell us here. She's heading west. If you kind of think about this picture as a map, right? Top is north, bottom south. The right is the east, and you can kind of see in the very faintly in the background big cities like New York with these big bridges, covering these rivers, kind of connecting these urban centers together. And of course, as we head out to the left side of the picture, that's the West, right? This new area, this area that's just kind of waiting, undiscovered. Kind of look at how Gast is using the colors here. On the right side, where America is established, there's light, there's growth, there's dynamism. On the left-hand side, there's darkness, there's clouds, kind of signifying the unknown, the superstitious, right? The world of kind of ignorance, if you will. So in a very real way, people like Jonathan Gast in the 19th century think of this as an important mission that the United States has, bringing the country out west, right? Is going to dispel a lot of this ignorance, dispel this superstition, bring American values and American way of life. And again, kind of turn your attention to that figure in the middle of the painting, right? This Lady Liberty. She's carrying a book. It could be the Bible, right? Kind of this religious culture that Americans have. It could also be things like laws, our legal system, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. So that's kind of what's wrapped up there. Also, if you notice, she's carrying a wire, right? That's actually the telegraph, a relatively recent invention in the early 19th century, a way to communicate, cover vast distances and spread information on a very, very quick basis, right? So Americans are kind of feeling good about themselves here. And they're a nation on the move in a very real way. And they are heading west, bringing things like the telegraph, bringing things like railroads to help, unite this country, tie this economy together, right? These western territories with the eastern parts of the United States. And of course, as you could kind of see in the bottom of the picture, Americans are going to spread out west to take advantage of these new territories, right? For the economic opportunities. It might be farmers like in the lower right, might be miners in the lower center of the picture. But it is going to come at a cost. And Gast does kind of acknowledge this, that as Americans pour into these areas, they are going to force people out. People like Native Americans, the buffalo are going to be chased off. That there is going to be a different world that exists out west here as the nation expands. But Gast does kind of capture a lot of the feeling, the enthusiasm a lot of Americans have, the importance that this mission, this divine mission, right, of manifest destiny, that we have a God-given right to expand this country across the continent all the way to the Pacific Ocean, regardless of who or what is in the way. That is a very palpable thing here in the 19th century. You're getting it from a lot of different places, not just people like Jonathan Gast in artwork, but even commentators of the time. An important political commentator, right? Today we call him a pundit, a political pundit, right? His name is John O'Sullivan. He's a Democrat. He's a big supporter of Andrew Jackson. And here in the 1830s, he's the guy that actually comes up with the term manifest destiny. To him, it's just obvious the United States should expand. For him, we have to, right? We have to fulfill this mission that God's given us, in O'Sullivan's opinion, right? So here in the 1830s into the 1840s, you have people like O'Sullivan promoting this idea of expanding out west, of getting more territory. He thinks that we should, right? That we stand for things that other countries don't. He calls us the great nation of the future, right? That's what his piece means, the great nation of futurity. That America is the future. Other countries like Britain, France, Germany, Russia, they're nations of the past. They're stuck in monarchies. We're a republic. We allow voting. We allow the common man, like his hero, Andrew Jackson, to rise from nothing to become president of the United States. He thinks that the United States offers all of these opportunities to people regardless of who they are. So he wants to bring those opportunities to more parts of the country. We're different, we're special, we're better. And in some ways, it's an early version of American exceptionalism, what historians kind of refer to as that idea, right? So for O'Sullivan, he's going to go out and promote this, that this is what Americans should be doing. Instead of squabbling over other issues, political divisions or regional divisions, we should put ourselves to the work of expanding this nation, gaining more territory, adding more states, making this country a bigger country, and bringing more of the world into kind of our orbit, if you will, kind of making the rest of the world look more and more like us, giving these economic freedoms, these political freedoms, these social, economic freedoms, right? Just expanding this as much as possible. Of course, there is one thing that O'Sullivan kind of leaves out of his piece, Great Nation of Futurity, and that, of course, is the issue of slavery. It complicates his vision of America, right? It is definitely something that Americans are arguing about, and to bring it up means he has to take a side on slavery. So the best way to deal with it is to not deal with it at all and ignore it. And he's doing what a lot of Americans are doing right now: ignore slavery, concentrate on these other things, kind of ignore these differences that the North and the South are having with each other, and just focus on this big picture idea of expanding the nation and pushing westward at this time, right? So again, this is something that's kind of captivating the attention of the country, and it's not just westward that the United States is moving in this period, right? We're moving in a lot of different directions. We're starting to negotiate with Britain for parts of Canada. The United States says that certain parts that Britain claims for Canada actually belong to the United States, right? Kind of the mouth or the origins of the Mississippi River Valley. We want that as our territory, right? We don't want anybody to have any control over the Mississippi River, this great river network that really helps trade and commerce flow in this country. We renegotiate the border between Maine and Canada with the British government. With Spain, we agree to buy the territory of Florida from the Spanish Empire. Americans are already moving into it. Andrew Jackson had actually invaded Florida during the War of 1812. So even the Spanish government realized it was really just a matter of time before Spain lost Florida to the United States, so they might as well sell it. And in the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, that becomes official. The United States now controls Florida. So you kind of see what's happening here between the Louisiana Purchase, the Adams-Onis Treaty for Florida, these negotiations with Britain over the northern boundaries of the United States. The United States is really taking on a lot of territory. Even after purchasing the Louisiana Purchase territory, we still want more. And there's this idea that this new territory is new opportunity. As this population is growing, as America is getting bigger just population-wise, this new territory represents places where people can go, get cheap land, get economic opportunity. It's a place for for transportation networks to flow. It's a way for new resources to be brought back east to this burgeoning economy that we have. For Southerners, it's a way to get more land, to grow more cotton, to feed that industrial machine. So there's a lot of reasons to do this, and a lot of Americans feel very positive about the country during this time. Although they do understand there are some issues, right? They're dealing with them in kind of their local lives. On a national level, this is something that really does captivate a lot of Americans' attention. And you kind of see how deep and how early this attention, this desire to expand goes. Take, for example, what happens in the Jefferson administration after he finalizes the purchase for the Louisiana territories, right, with France. Once that deal is done and the United States has officially gained possession of that territory, President Jefferson actually tells one of his presidential secretaries, a guy by the name of Meriwether Lewis, I want you to go out there and see what we've just bought. What do we have out there? How big is it? What's there? How many people could live out there? What could they do? Is it good farming territory? Is it good mining territory, right? What can we do with all of this? So he assigns Meriwether Lewis and an army captain by the name of William Clark to this massive expedition. Dozens of people that are going to be going. They're going to be led by a Native American woman by the name of Sacagawea. This is where she comes in and becomes a famous American folk hero. She's actually going to be the one that does a lot of the leading here and the one that actually transports this and really navigates this massive expedition while she's actually pregnant part of the time and has a newborn child during this 3-year expedition. So in the end, this is going to be a successful thing. It's a huge undertaking, this expedition that Lewis and Clark do, basically leaving St. Louis, the edge of the country at the time on the Mississippi River, and heading all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And I want you to kind of stop and think about that, right? We kind of understand why Jefferson wants these guys to get out there into this Louisiana territory, sail up the rivers and see what the land looks like and what we can do with it. That makes sense, right? We just kind of bought a house sight unseen, and now we need to send somebody in to inspect it to see if what we need to do or what it's going to be good for. But that's not their only job. That's not the only thing Jefferson asked these two to do with their expedition. He also tells them to go past the Louisiana Purchase territory, right? The western boundaries of the country now are the Rocky Mountains for the most part. Well, Jefferson tells them to go across the Rocky Mountains and make it all the way to the Pacific Ocean, if at all possible. That's why their expedition takes so long and why it travels so much territory. They actually leave the boundaries of the United States and go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So now we have to ask ourselves why. Why is Jefferson telling these guys to do this when there's so much territory in the Louisiana territory to take a look at, right? They could spend years just going up and down the rivers of the Louisiana Purchase territory and never even have to leave the confines of the United States. Well, the reality is Jefferson wants the American flag planted on the Pacific Ocean so we can claim some of that Northwest territory, the Oregon territory as it's known at the time, right? So we can lay claim to that territory as well. So think about this. Jefferson has just doubled the size of the country in 1803, 1804, and he's already thinking about the next step. Even though officially he's been saying, I think this is enough land forever. Like, well, it'll take us 1,000 years to fill up all this territory. But he's already, like a lot of Americans, thinking about what's next. What else is out there? What else can we claim for the United States? And it's not just Lewis and Clark that are out there doing these things. When their expedition comes back and explains what's out there, it's going to send a lot of Americans heading out west, right? A German immigrant, one of those German immigrants that's flowing into the country here in the early 19th century, John Jacob Astor. He comes to the United States and he heads out west as he hears about this expedition. He wants to become a fur trapper. He wants to really become rich. And it kind of shows just what is possible here in the United States. It maybe isn't possible in places like Europe, right? John Jacob Astor, kind of what we would kind of call lower middle class here in the early 19th century. He has a bit of an education in Germany. He has some job skills, but he decides there's really no future for him in Germany, this kind of divided place in Europe. He comes to the United States. He hears about the opportunities out west. He moves out west. He learns English. He gets into the fur trapping business. He trades with natives for furs, ships them back to Europe, and becomes rich. He becomes one of the first millionaires in the history of the United States, a German immigrant. And for a lot of Americans, this kind of epitomizes what's possible, what you can do in this country, right? That people can kind of come from more or less humble origins and really rise to the top here. That this country offers a lot of opportunity. And one of the places where you can find that opportunity the best, easiest, is in places like the West. So that's kind of what's happening here. And if you look at this map, you can see some of that happening, right? In red, you see the Lewis and Clark expedition. They're kind of following these major water routes throughout the Louisiana Purchase territory. And again, the Louisiana Purchase territory actually kind of ends right here. That's where the Rocky Mountains are. And they go past that, claiming all of this territory, or at least giving the United States part of the negotiation process for who controls this. The British say they control part of this. The Spanish say they control part of this territory. The Russians say they control part of this territory. Of course, there's Native Americans there as well. So there is going to be kind of a complex negotiation to see who's actually going to have control of this. But Lewis and Clark aren't the only ones, right? You have a bunch of others. You have this famous explorer, Jedediah Smith. He goes from basically the St. Louis territory, or near St. Louis, Independence, Missouri territory, and heads out west, kind of following along the Lewis and Clark expedition. But then he swings down along the Pacific coast into what is at that time Spain, and then eventually Mexico, and then kind of sweeps through what today is the American Southwest. So these Americans are all over the place, right? They're checking out everything. It's not just Lewis and Clark here. You've got Zebulon Pike, the guy that one of the tallest mountains in the United States, in the continental United States, Pikes Peak. It's going to be named after him because his expedition kind of finds it for Americans, right, and popularizes it. So there's a lot of going on here. And the one thing I do want you to notice is the United States isn't just interested in what's up for grabs or what it's claimed for itself. It's also checking out other people's territories, like the Spanish Empire and eventually Mexico, the country of Mexico's northern half of their country. So the United States is very interested in gaining more territory. It has claims to a lot of Canada. As a matter of fact, if you look at the top of this map, this is a famous line, the 5440 line, that a lot of Americans say actually is all of this, all the way across to Ontario, Quebec area. is up for grabs, that they have as much a right to it as the British or the Canadians do. So the United States is really kind of expanding in a lot of directions here, and they really want to see what's out there, what's available, what opportunities all of this has for them. And the numbers kind of back all of this up, right? By the 1840s, after this westward expansion really gets going, there's 1,500 Americans living in places like California, right on the edge of the North American continent, right? They're living technically in another country, Mexico, but they've moved there for these economic opportunities. Mexico's giving away land, trying to encourage settlement. So a lot of Americans take them up on it, become cattle ranchers out west. Most of them get into trade, right? Buying and selling of things in the Mexican government, in the Mexican territories, right? A lot of these people that are moving out west to places like California, from the Midwest, from the upper South, places like Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, right? These places that have been around, been a part of the United States for a while now. As new generations come along or born in places like Kentucky, they move west. We talked about that in our Chapter 11 lecture. The Davis family, born in Kentucky, they didn't see a future there. There's just no way for them to acquire more land. It was too expensive because there were too many people. So they move out to the edge of the country, the Mississippi Territory at the time, so they can grow cotton and get rich. And they do. And it's not just this financial desire that's spurring a lot of this, right? These economic opportunities. There's a lot going on here. And again, it kind of harkens back to what O'Sullivan's talking about in his Great Nation of Futurity, this idea of manifest destiny. A guy by the name of Lansford Hastings, he writes this guidebook, even though he never actually leaves the eastern part of the United States. He writes a book compiled from information from all these expeditions and tells people this is how you get west. Right, this is the land that it looks like. This is where you're going to find natives. This is where you're going to find water. This is where you can graze your cattle or your horses that are dragging your wagons. He's going to give them a guidebook on how to get out west, right? But in the beginning of this guidebook, he's going to say something important, that you, the American immigrant heading westwards, right? You're going to bring genuine republicanism, this idea that people get to vote, they have a say in their government, and unsophisticated democracy, that you get to vote because you're a person, right? Well, at least white males get to vote because they're people, right? And you're going to bring that to the West. This idea that it's not out there already, right? That the Spanish didn't have it in their empire, that this new country, Mexico, doesn't really have these things. Canada, because it's part of the British Empire, doesn't really have these things. Now, that's not true. Mexico allows people to vote. Canada, people vote, right? The British Empire, people vote. But there's this idea that Americans have that they are special, that they do it differently, they do it better than other countries. And that by expanding, taking these territories, moving into these territories, we're going to change them. We're going to replace the ignorance, superstition, and despotism that these places have now and replace it with all these good things that America stands for, all these good political traditions that we've now established in our country. So there's a lot going on here in the 1830s and 1840s. There's a lot of things that kind of spur this activity as it builds up into the 1850s. Of course, the most famous of these trails westward is the Oregon Trail, right? It's about a 2,000-mile journey from St. Louis, Mississippi River area all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And most people that head out west, that take these journeys, they're going to be in families or groups. They're often going to be prepared for this. They're going to read books like Langston Hughes's guidebook, right? But still, even with that knowledge, even with that preparation, it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard to do this. It could take almost a year, about 6 to 9 months actually, to get all the way across the country. Famously, some parties aren't going to make it, like the Donner Party that gets trapped in the Sierra Nevadas in the winter, have to revert to cannibalism to keep at least some of them alive. Things get so bad, right? So this is a dangerous thing. It's a hard, arduous task that's happening. But again, it is happening. There are huge numbers of Americans heading out west. For a lot of people, they kind of see it as a safety valve, right? Say you're born in Ohio. Your family has a few hundred acres, but you're the fourth or fifth kid. There's no way you're going to inherit enough land to support you and your own family, right, when you get older. So you head out west, right? You try to find cheap land farther out west, maybe in Indiana, the bordering territory, maybe in Illinois, the one after that, maybe in the new territory, Iowa, the territories after that, or maybe you just head all the way out west to Oregon, right? Where land is practically free, you just have to get out there. So for a lot of Americans, there's this idea of economic opportunity, but that's not the only story that's happening there. As I mentioned in one of our earlier lectures, last chapter, there are new brands of Protestantism popping up in the United States here in the 19th century. One of those is the Church of Latter-day Saints, right? What we today know as the Mormon Church. Well, it starts in upstate New York, one of these kind of responses to all this immigration, these new religious groups kind of coming into the country, a new way of doing Protestantism. Well, some of their practices were a little different, right? Weren't always seen as socially acceptable. One of them was polygamy, the idea that one man could have multiple wives. Mormons saw this as justified, established in the Bible, and stories where prophets of the Bible had multiple wives, so they followed that practice. It had a practical issue too. It's a great way to build up the size of your church, right? Have lots of kids, raise them as good Mormons, and suddenly there's a lot of good Mormons, right? Well, that practice of polygamy was frowned on by almost every American, even to this day, right? There's this idea that marriage is between two individuals, not multiple individuals. And Mormons were attacked for their views, right? Not just because they were different versions of Christianity, but because of some of their social practices like polygamy. They eventually got kicked out of the state of New York, relocated to places like Ohio and Indiana. As those places filled up, they got kicked out of there as laws were changed to kind of make their religion invalid or in some cases illegal. They eventually moved some of them to places like St. Louis, the Missouri territory. And eventually as that filled up, they felt that they were being persecuted again. Eventually, about 4,000 Mormons, under the leadership of Brigham Young, decide that they're not going to find religious freedom in a country that says it's about religious freedom. They decide to leave the United States, and they actually move to Mexico, to a northern part of Mexico that we today call Utah, around the Great Salt Lake area. The Mormons move in the early mid-1840s to this place called Utah to find real religious freedom. The Mexican government's more than happy to have them. It helps build up their economy. It helps populate the northern regions of their country. And hopefully, because the Mormons aren't really happy with Americans at the time, that it'll keep Americans from moving into that part of Mexico. So for the Mexican government, this is a good thing. And for the Mormon church at the time, it was a good thing. It was a way to kind of establish themselves and to be left alone. So there's a lot of reasons for Americans to be moving here during this period, and they're moving into a lot of different places. And of course, one of the places that they move to first, and in huge numbers, is a place that is pretty accessible to Americans, and that, of course, is a place called Texas. Now, of course, Texas was claimed by the Spanish Empire for hundreds of years, and then when Mexico broke off and became its own country during a period of revolution in the Spanish Empire in the early 19th century, it becomes part of Mexico. And sort of like with the Mormons, the Mexican government starts inviting Americans in, especially in a part of Texas called East Texas. That's the wetter part of Texas. There's lots of rivers. It's right next to Louisiana, right? It's right near the Mississippi River region, right? There are some big rivers that flow through that area. It is prime cotton growing land. And to the Mexican government, this makes sense. Bring in Americans who know how to grow cotton, help stimulate Mexico's economy like cotton growing is stimulating the American economy, and it'll help establish Mexico as a big, powerful country. So they actually open up their territory. They say, look, Americans come in, become a part of our country, just agree to follow our laws, learn Spanish, become good Catholics like we are. Catholicism is our mandated church for our country, although we're not going to force you to not go to others. You will help support the Catholic Church, though. That's part of it, right? That's what making it official church is all about. So they do put some requirements on these American immigrants, right, coming into places like Mexico, at least in Texas, in the Texas region. But they also give away land. They say, here, come in, use this land, develop it. We want you to. So thousands of Americans start taking up the Mexican government's offer in the late 1820s into the 1830s. Several hundred Americans, all the way out in the 1830s, into places like California and what will eventually become New Mexico. So Americans are kind of moving through northern Mexico all over the place. And that's why we got to turn our attention here to Mexico's story for a minute. This is going to be very important to why things work out the way they do. Again, in the early 1800s, what is today Mexico started breaking off from the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire had been crumbling for a long time. The Spanish Empire really kind of hit its stride in the 15th, 16th centuries, right? By the 17th centuries, it was at its maximum potential, and then it was kind of in a slow decline since then. By the 1700s, the Spanish Empire wasn't nearly what it had been before. Corruption in the government kind of kept it from being efficient. Just a competition with other European empires really took a toll on the Spanish Empire. So in a big way, it was in a period of decline. And by the early 19th century, portions of the Spanish Empire no longer wanted to be run by a government that they saw as corrupt. They were inspired by the American Revolution, by the ideals that kind of came out of it, that people should have a right to run themselves. Well, Mexico was no different. They kind of latched onto a lot of the ideas of the American Revolution, and by the early 1800s had launched a full-scale rebellion against the Spanish Empire. By 1821, that was acknowledged even by Spain that Mexico was now an independent country. They've become their own place. And it's actually a huge country. It goes from today, kind of the Northern California, northern Utah, Nevada line, all the way down to the Yucatan Peninsula. So in a lot of ways, it's about the same size as the United States at the time, right? Even with the Louisiana Purchase. These are two really immense countries. And at first, Mexico does kind of get its independence and kind of come up with a unified vision for what they want their country to be. There's a lot of things that the Mexicans can agree on in the first kind of wave of freedom, if you will. And one of the big things they decide is they're not going to have slavery. Regardless of what socioeconomic class you were in Mexico, right, what your family background was, you could agree that slavery didn't work out very well for Mexico, and they decide to get rid of it. Now, what happens after that is they can't agree on a lot else. Some elements of Mexican society, they want to kind of form a federal form of government like the United States had, allow local control, kind of regional control, and then kind of a federal national government to control things. They really wanted to emulate the United States and help kind of jumpstart their economy through investment from the federal government into these regions and local areas, and really kind of build off of what they saw the United States doing. Others, more conservative elements, really wanted to kind of just create a newer version of the Spanish Empire. They really just saw themselves as kind of a hierarchical, almost an aristocratic system, right? Where you'd have nobles, you'd have maybe even a king. They tried to find somebody to be their king when Mexico first became a country, but they couldn't. The more liberal groups said, well, we don't want a king anyways. We want the people to make decisions. More conservative people, especially big landowners, said, no, we're not really interested in everybody voting. We feel we should have control because we have the most land. So what this actually leads to is a period of political instability here during the 1820s for Mexico. Now that it's a new nation, it has trouble actually running itself coherently. And one person kind of takes advantage of this. His name is General Santa Anna. He becomes kind of a de facto dictator for the country. Even though he's not much of a military authority or even a military leader, he kind of portrays himself as one and uses that reputation as a military leader to take control of the country. So that kind of explains why Mexico's inviting a lot of Americans in. It's a way to kind of help stimulate the country, maybe bring some stability to it, right? Develop its economy and help pay for a lot of the bills that it has now that it's an independent country. Again, it finds itself in a lot of the same problems the United States was when it got its independence from Great Britain. You have a lot of debt, you don't have a lot of international relations, you don't have a real industry, right? Everything had been going through Spain for Mexico for a long time, so now they had to kind of find their way. And bringing in Americans to help kind of jumpstart all this made a lot of sense. But of course, there's one big thing to kind of notice here. Mexico has officially abolished slavery. So when they invite Americans into their territory, yes, they want them to come in and grow cotton. Yes, they want them to help stimulate the economy, but they also want Americans to follow those laws. They don't want them to bring their slaves. For people in Mexico, they think, hey, you can grow cotton by hiring labor, and that's absolutely true. But for a lot of southern cotton growers, that cuts into their profits, right? It's not the most profitable way to grow cotton. So they bring their slaves anyways. And this problem just grows. By the mid-1830s, after this period of political instability in Mexico City, the capital of Mexico is starting to kind of level off. This guy Santa Anna takes control of the government and starts kind of imposing his will on things, right? Well, Americans have kind of taken advantage of this lax oversight to flood in by the tens of thousands into East Texas to grow cotton, where the government of Mexico is literally giving away land. And of course, they're bringing their slaves. More than 10,000 slaves in Mexico, a nation that officially doesn't have slavery. So this becomes a bit of an issue for the Mexican government. This guy Santa Anna wants to show that he is in control. He starts telling these Americans living in Texas, hey, you've got to get out, or you have to free your slaves if you're going to stay. He gives them basically an ultimatum. Now, to those Americans living in Texas, right, especially eastern Texas, where they're now been there for maybe a decade or maybe even 15 years or so, they don't want to leave. They've got hundreds, maybe thousands of acres of land. They're growing lots of cotton. They're getting rich. They're going across the border to settle their legal disputes. Basically, they're just Americans living in somebody else's front yard. And they don't want to be told by this government that they see as a foreign government telling them what to do. They start saying, we refuse to acknowledge the authority of Mexico City, of the Mexican government. So a call starts to go out amongst these Americans. Let's resist the Mexican government. Let's declare our own independence. And they ask for help. They ask Americans, they ask the United States government, help us against Mexico. Now, at the time, one of the most important people living in Texas, an American living in Texas, is from Tennessee. He's actually really good friends with the President of the United States at the time, Andrew Jackson. His name is Sam Houston. He's kind of leading this call, asking for help, saying, hey, look, the Mexican government has a problem with us. They're going to come. They're going to try and take away our slaves. They're going to try and maybe take our land away and force us off of it. We need to resist. Now, you would think Sam Houston, talking to his personal friend, Andrew Jackson, would get a lot of help. And he does get a lot of sympathy, but Andrew Jackson realizes something. Helping these Texans means going to war with Mexico, and he refuses to do that. But he won't stop individual Americans from going and helping. So this is where you see a lot of people, and especially in the upper South, places like Kentucky, places like Tennessee, even northern Georgia and Alabama, start moving out. And even some from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, right? These western territories start going to Texas to help in this independence movement, as it's being called, right? People like Davy Crockett, a famous frontiersman from Tennessee, people like James Bowie, a famous frontiersman from Kentucky, are all heading out west, gathering volunteers to help fight for Texas's independence from what they declare to be an overreaching foreign government. So here's the stages kind of set here in 1835. A bunch of Texans, led by people like Sam Houston, these big cotton growers in East Texas, are defying the authority of the Mexican government. And more Americans are starting to flood into this territory. Their numbers are just going to increase here. So if you're the government of Mexico, if you're General Santa Anna, the guy that's officially kind of the president, but really dictator of Mexico, you've got to do something, or you have no real authority. You have no real control here. So when Sam Houston declares independence in 1835, 1836, that winter period there, you have to respond to this. And the Mexican government does. They have an army. It's pretty well equipped, pretty well trained. It's been used to fight against each other, really, for the past 15 years. So it is pretty well ready to go. General Santa Anna himself is going to lead about an 8,000 man army to go and crush this rebellion in Texas and keep Texas firmly part of the nation of Mexico. So here during this period, right, this main army, right, of about 6,000 troops ends up kind of marching into central Texas. And a group of these volunteers, led by people like Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett, right, about 200 or so volunteers from the United States helping Texans gain their independence, they tried to delay this army at a place called the Alamo. Now, whether it was really needed or whether that was what their actual orders were, we don't really know. But in the end, they do fight, and they hold up this huge Mexican army for weeks. In the end, the Mexican troops, under the command of their general, Santa Anna, they stormed this thing called the Alamo, originally just a small little Catholic church in what is today San Antonio, Texas. It had been kind of reinforced by these 200 American volunteer fighters. And the Mexican troops stormed it, which means they put bayonets on the ends of their rifles, basically, kind of narrow swords. It just ways to kind of impale people, right? Turn your rifle into a spear. And they charge into this fortified little fort, former church, and it turns into a bloody, bloody battle. Almost every one of those 200 American volunteer fighters dies, including Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. Several thousand Mexican troops are killed or wounded in this battle. It is just a bloody, bloody affair. But it does slow up Santa Anna's response here, right? He's trying to crush every bit of resistance along the way here to prove Mexico is in control. And when he has trouble just taking out 200 Americans, it makes a lot of people kind of question his abilities, right? And it gives hope to the other side. So that's what kind of brings us to an important battle. As what's left of Santa Anna's army marches further into East Texas, trying to kind of bring this rebellion to an end, this guy, Sam Houston, has been able to pull together a army, right? It's not a well-trained army, but they are enthusiastic. And again, there's a lot of Americans pouring over the border to take part in this. So he's got an army about the same size as the Mexican army. And in a place called the Battle of San Jacinto, Sam Houston and his Texans actually beat Santa Anna and his professional army. The general of Mexico, the leader of Mexico, Santa Anna, is himself captured by these Texans. And this effectively is going to end the war. Santa Anna is going to be forced to sign a peace treaty that has really ambiguous borders for this new nation, Texas, but he has to acknowledge Texas is now an independent nation. Sam Houston and all of these Texans have actually won their independence, largely with a lot of help from Americans flooding over the border to kind of reinforce their numbers. So here in 1836, tens of thousands of Americans now living in this place called Texas have to decide what's next. What do we do now? They want to become part of the United States. They decide to make Sam Houston their kind of their de facto leader of their new territory, and they start asking for admittance to the United States as a state. President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, says, hey, I can't do that because then it looks like the United States has just stolen part of Mexico without going to war technically. So he says, I can't do that. In the end, Texas ends up in kind of a limbo, right? In their peace treaty, Texas claims a lot of territory, right? You can see in the map in the lower right-hand corner, the areas with the hash lines. That is all the territory that Mexico claims. Or that Texas claims from Mexico. The area in gold is what Mexico claims it gave to Texas. So there's a lot of ambiguity here. There's a lot of questions left to be resolved. Santa Anna's plan was to come back and after he gets his freedom from signing the peace treaty, his idea was to go back home to Mexico City, raise a new army, and come and crush this newly independent Texas. But when he gets back to Mexico City, he finds that there's been a revolution, he's been replaced, and he's no longer has any power and authority. And as a matter of fact, the Texas is going to get off pretty easily because the Mexico, being kind of disrupted by the Civil War, can't come up with an effective response to Texas's independence. That in the end, Texas is going to be independent. And it's going to have to kind of exist in its own kind of status, right? It's going to effectively be its own country for about 10 years or so. From about 1836 to 1844, Texas is going to continually ask to be admitted as a state to the Union and repeatedly be told no. Even when the next president of the United States comes in, Martin Van Buren. Remember, Van Buren was Andrew Jackson's first kind of Secretary of State and then his vice president for Jackson's second term. He's the guy that's really running the Democratic Party for Jackson. So when Jackson says, no, we're not going to bring in Texas, it causes too many problems, it's really Van Buren that's saying that, and Jackson's just kind of saying it out loud, right? Van Buren really runs this Democratic Party. So when he becomes president of the United States in 1837 in his own right, Van Buren just kind of follows a lot of Jackson's policies because they were really Van Buren's policies too. And as president, Van Buren's going to be dealing with kind of internal issues anyways. Remember, this is when the United States has its first real economic depression, caused in part between the fights between this new party, the Whig Party, right, and the Democratic Party under Jackson. They don't like each other. The leader of the Whigs, Henry Clay, and Jackson are bitter political enemies. When Jackson leaves office, that just transfers to Martin Van Buren, right? So Van Buren's got his own issues, and the last thing he wants to do is bring in Texas to complicate this issue of bringing in another slave state, which needs to be offset by a free state because of the Missouri Compromise. There are no free states ready to come in right now, so bringing Texas in means the South would control the Senate and would have a lot more people, a lot more representation because of the 3/5 clause in Congress, and a lot of Northerners don't like that idea, so he decides to just table all of this. Texas is going to essentially become its own independent country for almost 10 years. Sam Houston, the leader of the Texas Rebellion, becomes their president, and in the end, they just have to decide what to do. And this attitude, this idea that Texas is going to cause problems, keeps kind of flowing over, right? It keeps rolling into the next administration, if you will. After 4 years of Van Buren's presidency, a lot of Americans wanted a change. They kind of felt that Van Buren, the Democratic Party, had been in charge for too long. There were some ideas of corruption, especially under Jackson's last years with his pet banks. So in the 1840 election, this new political party, the Whigs, gains a political traction here. They win a resounding victory, both in the popular vote and really in the electoral vote. They win votes almost everywhere in the country. William Henry Harrison and the Whigs are now in control. But we know what happens there. William Henry Harrison is really only famous for one thing as president, and that's the fact that he's the first president to die while in office. Actually, he dies within his first 30 days of being president. So in the end, the first Whig president doesn't really do anything, right? He doesn't even have time to do anything. Who really takes over is his successor, John Tyler, who was thrown out of the Democratic Party by Jackson and had really just joined the Whigs because he had no place else to go. Not because he actually liked Whig ideas, not because he actually supported the political party, but just because it was a place where he could kind of park himself while he's waiting for Jackson and the Democrats to take him back. So in 1841, when William Henry Harrison dies and John Tyler becomes the president of the United States, he's going to want to do something, right? But he has a bit of a problem. Because he's not a Whig, he doesn't like any of the Whig proposals. Anything the Whigs want to do, like expanding infrastructure, right? He's going to say no to. He doesn't want government investments, right? He doesn't want to do any of the things that Whigs want to do. He doesn't want high tariffs. He's a Southerner. He's a slave owner. He hates tariffs. So in the end, there's a big question of what to do with Texas, and domestic American politics are starting to kind of have take a toll on all of this, right? For the public, for a lot of just average Americans, they like the idea of bringing Texas in and just making the country bigger. Because of the way you read that peace treaty that forms Texas out of the rebellion against Mexico. If you kind of add on all those territories that you could kind of claim as part of Texas, Texas is huge. You could have 2 or 3 states there. So for a lot of Americans, this is just a great way to expand the nation and add a lot more territory. But of course, the government, even under William Henry Harrison, understood this could result in war with Mexico. It would look like we stole part of Mexico from it. And then, of course, by adding another slave state, especially a big one like Texas, means that there's going to be an upset to this balance that's been created because of the Missouri Compromise. So all the way from 1836 to 1841, this has kind of been pushed off to the side. Nobody's really kind of come to a position here. Texas has been seen as an independent country and has been running itself as an independent country since 1837. But in the meantime, a lot of people, especially from the South, have moved to Texas because when Texas becomes its own country, it legalizes slavery, means you can move there, take slaves, grow cotton, make a lot of money. And tens of thousands of Americans are doing just that. By the 1840s, there's more than 100,000 Americans living in Texas, more than 20,000 slaves enslaved in Texas. So this problem is just getting bigger, right? And all throughout the United States, especially in places like Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, you'll see signs saying GTT, gone to Texas, right? People just picking up and moving west, kind of in this desire to move west and start over and see about changing your economic status in the country, right? So here in 1837, the 1840s, this question isn't going away. People want Texas in the country. Americans are moving to Texas. There's more Americans living in Texas than ever before. They're still doing business with the United States. They're still using American courts and legal systems. For all intents and purposes, Texas is operating as part of the United States, right? It's just not legally, right, or internationally. So that's what brings us to this guy, John Tyler, right? His entire presidency from when he took over when Harrison dies has been essentially saying no to anything, right? He's incredibly unpopular with the Whigs because he won't do what the Whigs want to do. He's still not popular with the Democrats because, well, he left the party and joined the Whigs. So he's really kind of out in a no man's land during his 3 years in office. And in 1844, as he's getting ready to leave office, he knows he can't get support to run for president in his own right. The Democrats and the Whigs won't support him. So he wants to be known for something, right? Right now, he's only known for really just stopping everything. So he decides in 1844 that he's going to make this issue of Texas an issue. He says we should bring Texas in as a state. Texas has been petitioning every year, hey, can we become a state now? Hey, can we become a state now? Well, Tyler says in 1844, let's do it. But it's not the president's decision to make. He can help the process, but ultimately it has to be Congress that admits new territories as states. So this becomes the big issue in 1844 with the presidential election. What's your stance on this? Do you support making Texas a state or not? The Whig Party that wants to kind of get back to business here, right, after a disaster of having a non-Whig as their president, right, John Tyler, they decide we better run the guy that we know if he becomes president, he'll do what Whigs want to do. And that, of course, is Henry Clay. He really is the ideological center of this party. It's his ideas on tariffs, on economic expansions and infrastructure projects that's really the core of what Whigs are about anyways. So he decides to run for president yet again. Remember, this guy has failed twice already. This will be his third and final chance or opportunity to be president. So he throws himself into the arena here. The Democratic Party has some problems. There is no clear successor to Jackson and Van Buren, right? The Democratic Party is really kind of splintered into a lot of different positions. Most of them still kind of see themselves as Jackson men, right? As people that support the idea that anybody should be able to become president. But a lot of these Democrats are Southerners, and of course, they want to protect themselves. There are people like John Calhoun, who's now back in the Democratic Party, saying, hey, look, if we're going to have a president, it has to be a president that's going to protect the South, protect slavery. So, in the end, the Democratic Party fights amongst itself for several months as to who they're going to run for president. And eventually, they just decide there's one guy that we all can agree we don't hate. So that's not a rousing endorsement, but James K. Polk kind of emerges as the only person that they can all agree, we're okay with him. So he becomes the Democratic standard bearer, and he has a clear message. The one thing that everybody can kind of agree, all right, I'm behind it, at least nominally, this guy is, he wants to make the country bigger. He wants to take land from Britain and Canada, add it to the United States. He wants to add land from Mexico and add it to the United States. He's already said we're going to add Texas as part of the country. This guy dedicates himself to the idea of manifest destiny. On the other side, the Whig Party, theirs is a little bit more of a complicated issue. They have a candidate, but they can't take a clear stand. Their guy, Henry Clay, needs to keep both Northerners and Southerners happy. So again, you can kind of see these differences that we've been talking about over the last couple of lectures, right? They're there, right? And they know they're there, but they're trying to avoid them as best as possible. So Clay ends up not taking a position on Texas, on not taking a position on expanding the nation. He says, look, let's just do what we've been doing. Build up our economy, build up these infrastructure projects. Yeah, we'll need a tariff to protect our new industries. Let's just keep doing that stuff. But when people ask him, well, what about Texas? The other guy, Polk, is saying, let's add Texas. What's your position? Well, Clay's position is he has no position. He needs to avoid this. Because if he says, yeah, let's bring in Texas as a slave state, Northerners are going to get upset, saying, hey, wait a minute, that gives the South more power in Congress. We don't like that. They may stop the stuff that we want to do. And of course, if he says, no, we're not going to bring in Texas as a slave state, then Southerners will get upset. They'll say, hey, wait a minute, you have to protect our interests or else we're not going to vote for you. So in the end, there's no resounding candidate here, right? There's no clear-cut winner here. Clay has no real positions. Polk has positions, but he's not very popular. And in the end, Polk is barely going to squeak out a victory. 38,000 votes is all that gives him the win. So again, not an overwhelming victory by any stretch of the imagination. But Polk is the type of guy that he's going to see a win as a win. He doesn't care by how little or how much. He's now president. He's now going to get to do his thing. And this very much kind of explains what's happening in politics here in the 1830s and 1840s. As the United States is growing, becoming a bigger country, politicians need to really start making sure they answer to their constituents, to their different groups of people. And now as this is becoming a bigger and bigger country, you're seeing kind of new groups of people. The South wants somebody that represents them, right? This kind of goes back to the 1824 election in a lot of ways, right? Southerners want a guy that's going to protect their interests, look out for what they want above all else. People in the northeastern part of the country, they're going to want somebody that represents them, that looks out for their interests. People in this new western part of the country are going to want somebody that looks out for their interests as well. So you as a politician during this period, a Democrat or a Whig, you have to answer those things. The Democrats and Polk do at least answer some of this. They kind of tell you, hey, look, if you're a Northerner, we're going to get you more territory from Canada and from Oregon. If you're a Southerner, we're going to get you more territory from Mexico and Texas, right? He's trying to appeal to them in all ways. The Whigs having a little bit harder of a time. But in the end, they're all trying to appeal to these different regions. It's just how successful you are determines how successful you'll be in the elections. And that is a very important thing to kind of note here, right? That you as a political party have to answer these questions. The Democrats do poorly, but they do. The Whigs can't. The Whigs lose. The Democrats win. And that's kind of what's going to happen over and over again. What we're going to see is these questions become so difficult, so hard, you're so afraid of losing part of the country to the other part that you want to win, that it becomes harder and harder to have real positions. The Whig position here in the 1844 elections going to become the normal position for almost every political party going forward here as the country gets bigger. So now that Polk is president, right, he's going to set about kind of fulfilling these promises he made. And in some ways, Polk is going to be one of the most successful presidents in the history of the United States. He said he was going to gain more territory from Canada. He actually establishes the boundary that we still have to this day with Canada, right, with the British Empire at the time. He gets part of the Oregon Territory for the United States. He gets countries like Spain, Russia to drop their claims to that territory. He gets Britain to give about half the Oregon Territory to the United States. So he is delivering on those promises. And of course, he also tries to get the rest of northern Mexico, right? He's already said we're going to make Texas part of the United States. He's put that into play to admit Texas as a state. And then he sends a representative, James Slidell, to Mexico City, to the Mexican government, to negotiate a sale for the upper half of their country. Now, in the end, Polk does authorize this delegation to offer $25 million, almost twice what we paid for the Louisiana Territory, for something about half the size of the Louisiana Territory. So from the American point of view, they feel like they're giving a good offer. But if you're Mexico, you're pretty insulted by this, right? The United States just took part of your country in Texas and added it to its own. So it does look like Texas was stolen by Americans, right? And then Americans come in and say, hey, we want to give you a really low figure for half of your country that you already are using and living in. So it's no wonder that Mexico says no to this delegation, kicks Slidell and the Americans out, and then starts saying things like, we're going to make sure that we don't give up any more territory. And in a way, this is kind of what Polk wants. He knows that Mexico is going to say no to these overtures for purchase. He knows Mexico's upset about admitting Texas as a state. So Polk is going to take advantage of this. He sends 4,000 American troops down to the border of Texas and Mexico. Now, the problem is, as I mentioned earlier, there is no clear definition of what this border is. So when American troops show up, they see what they think are Mexican troops on American land. And of course, the Mexicans see American troops on what they think is Mexican territory. So in the end, these two armies point guns at each other, tensions rise, and eventually there are shots. And this is what Polk needs. Polk is looking for justification here. In April of 1846, news comes on those new telegraphs that are being used to transmit information that Mexico and the United States have fired shots at each other, that there are dead American soldiers. And to that, Polk uses that moment to declare war, right? In May of 1846, Polk goes to Congress and says, notwithstanding all our efforts to avoid it, war exists by the act of Mexico herself. So he tries to pin this war on Mexico. But in reality, Mexico, the United States hasn't tried a lot of negotiations here. We tried one feeble attempt, and really an insulting attempt, to go ahead and make Mexico sell part of its territory. And of course, they said no. And that was the extent of the deliberations, the diplomacy between the two countries. In the end, Polk wanted to kind of engineer a war, and he gets one, right? Polk is able to say, Mexico has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. But the reality is, we didn't do a lot of diplomacy. There wasn't a lot of talking before this. We didn't try to avoid this war, right? We actually tried to engineer it. And it's uncertain if Americans were actually killed on American soil. Again, we probably needed to negotiate before any of this what the actual boundaries with Texas and Mexico were, right? Where was the actual line? What river, what mountains were the boundaries between these two countries? Well, Polk never does any of this, right? He just wants to get to this point of war so that he can then say, all right, now let's take the rest of the territory we want. And there are some people kind of bringing this up at the time, right after Polk asked for this declaration of war. One young Whig congressman from Illinois stands up and says, I would really like the president to show me on a map where American blood was spilled on American soil. That young congressman was Abraham Lincoln. He's in the U.S. Congress at the time. He's a congressman from Illinois. And he thinks that this is, again, kind of a shady proposition, that there's a lot of misinformation going on here, that in the end, this needs to be studied before we just jump to war. But Polk has kind of energized the country. He's played this up pretty well. The word has gotten out that Americans have been killed, and a lot of people think that this is a justified war, that we should go to war with Mexico. So in the end, it happens. The United States and Mexico are at war. But Lincoln isn't the only one that's against this idea, right? Another Whig, this one from Ohio, his name's Thomas Corwin. He says that this war is a bad idea. He says that we're not going to be doing anything good here, and it's going to be actually bad for us to fight this war. And he actually starts off his explaining his position by doing something kind of interesting. He brings up the American Revolution, but not in the context of the United States defending itself from a foreign power like Britain, right, fighting for our independence. He puts it on the side of Mexico. He says, hey, look, we're Britain here. Mexico is like us. They're a small, weak country fighting for its independence. They're going to be fighting for their homeland. They're going to be fighting for their very homes, right? He says, we're the bad guys here. And he tries to point that out to Americans. That while O'Sullivan had been saying just a few years earlier how America was the nation of the future, Corwin's trying to point out, no, we're actually kind of acting like nations of the past. We're acting like France, like Britain, like Spain, just going out and conquering our neighbors, taking what we want. And then Corwin goes on to something else. He says, look, I understand we're going to win this war, right? We're a bigger country, have more people, that in the end we should be able to win this war. But it's not fighting the war that he's worried about. It's what happens after we've won. He says something really awful is going to happen if we take all of this territory from Mexico. We have to decide what kind of territory it is. He's already seen problems with trying to admit Texas as a slave state. He thinks that that problem will just get worse, that more and more Northerners are like him. They may not be willing to abolish slavery, but they can definitely see stopping its expansion as a good thing, right? Southerners, on the other hand, don't want to stop the expansion at all. They want to expand it as far as they possibly can. So for Corwin, he sees this as just causing more problems, as to making this issue of the expansion of slavery unavoidable in the future. So there's a lot of big things happening here. And a couple of other points about this war that we want to keep in mind. Some historians have kind of looked at this war as a training ground, if you will. A lot of famous names of the Civil War, the war that happens in about 20 years from this point, right, is very much a part of this, right? Robert E. Lee is going to is a young captain in the war with Mexico. Ulysses S. Grant is a lieutenant. Jefferson Davis is a colonel, eventually a general during this war. Winfield Scott is a famous general who will be leading the early efforts of the Union against the Confederacy. William Tecumseh Sherman, one of Grant's lieutenant commanders, right, is a lieutenant during this war, gets his start here. So this war is important for a lot of reasons, not just because it's going to affect the future of the country on the issue of the expansion of slavery, but also because it's going to teach a lot of people how to fight in a war, right? What you need to do to win a war. And it's starting here in this war with Mexico. Now, of course, one of the things the United States wants to do is grab this upper half of Mexico, what is then called the California territory, right? Alta California is another way of explaining it. But really, it's this territory really from the edge of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, parts of Colorado. That is a territory that the United States wants. We send military forces in there under the command of people like John Fremont in Northern California and people like Stephen Kearny in Southern California, New Mexico, Arizona region, and we start taking part of Mexico. There's even a U.S. naval fleet off the coast of California that takes Monterrey, at that point the capital of northern Mexico, and take control of that. So very quickly, the United States starts doing its job, right? We were prepared for this. The U.S. Navy is sitting off the coast of California waiting for word that war has been declared. Again, Polk is engineering this thing in a very real way. But the bulk of the fighting here is actually going to be fought on the Texas border in this big disputed area, and then eventually when the United States invades Mexico itself. So there are going to be two big names here. Zachary Taylor is the commander of forces kind of in the Texas region, right? He's going to have a large army there where he's going to fight the bulk of the Mexican army. And time again, in very close battles, Zachary Taylor is going to beat the Mexican generals, right? The United States wins these battles, but they do come at a pretty heavy cost. The Mexicans fight valiantly. They're defending their homes. They're fighting for their country, just like the United States is. So they fight pretty well. These are pretty bloody battles, but almost every time the breaks go the way of the United States, right? Like in a lot of close sports contests, if all the breaks go to one team, the score can kind of be lopsided, even though the teams are pretty fairly balanced, right? Well, that's kind of what's happening here. Mexico has a big professional army. They're pretty well equipped. The United States has a very small professional army, has to rely on a lot of volunteers, and we've seen how that's played out in previous wars for the United States. Volunteers often don't fight well. But because there are more American officers now, we've had training schools like West Point and Annapolis, training people how to lead combat troops in combat. We're able to fight better in this war than we ever have in the others. So in the end, this war kind of goes our way, especially when Winfield Scott, one of these famous generals of the war with Mexico, leads a new American army that's raised in the United States, brought by the United States Navy over to the coast of Mexico. He kind of jumps along the coast of Mexico, attacking Mexican cities, and then invades in a place called Veracruz. He starts attacking inland and marches on the city, the capital of Mexico, Mexico City, and captures that, essentially ending the war at that point. And so in the aftermath of this war, which is over in less than a year's time, right? We have to kind of decide what happens now. The United States is absolutely in control in the northern half of Mexico. The question is, what do we do about the southern half of Mexico? We've captured the capital. There are American troops as far down as places like Monterrey, Mexico. So what are we going to do? Or some are saying we should just take the whole thing, take all of Mexico and make it part of the United States. Others are saying, no, that's a whole different group of people. We already have too many immigrants. We don't want different types of people, especially Catholics in this country, right? That anti-Irish sentiment that's kind of popped up here in the United States during this time. So during the aftermath of this war, there's a big discussion as just how much do we want to take. And in the end, the United States decides to kind of stick with what it originally said it wanted, the upper half of Mexico. The United States is going to add 25% to its mass, right? We've already gotten the Oregon Territory in our treaty with Britain. We now have what's left of the Louisiana Purchase Territory still to be worked out. Places like Montana will be created out of that. And now we have Texas and the rest of what's called the Mexican Cession, what will eventually be California, Colorado, Utah, right? Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Oklahoma, right? There's a huge territory here. Mexico is going to lose half its country in this war, right? In the end, the United States is going to actually kind of show that it feels a little guilty about what happened here, in that we're going to give Mexico money, not as much as we had offered them in the beginning for half of their country, the 25 million, but 15 million even after we've won the war. Usually things go differently in the 19th century in peace treaties. Losers have to pay the winners money. But the United States, to make itself feel better and feel like it's not taking advantage of the situation here, actually gives money to Mexico to try and kind of smooth over the hard feelings, so to speak. So here in 1848, in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, right, the United States has now kind of fulfilled this idea of manifest destiny. We have now stretched across the continent, right, from the borders of Canada to the borders of Mexico. The United States now has a clear path to the Pacific Ocean. And Polk has delivered on a lot of those promises, right? He's gotten a lot of the Oregon Territory for Northerners. He's now gotten Texas for Southerners. And now we have all this new territory from Mexico that is kind of up for grabs. Who's going to get it? And that kind of leads us to the big question in the aftermath, kind of what Thomas Corwin is speaking about when the war begins. That is a huge chunk of territory, this Mexican cession. It could be anywhere from 4 to 10 states, right, based on the size of previous territories. So we don't know how many states this is going to be. And a lot of Americans are worried about this future, right? They kind of feel bad about where this war has gone, right? You can kind of see it in the remarks of two Northerners to this war. Ulysses S. Grant is from these Western territories, originally kind of from Illinois, right? Territory. He kind of felt or said about this war that he served in, the Mexican War was one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger nation against a weaker nation. Abraham Lincoln, who I mentioned earlier, right? He was very much against this war as well. He felt that the war was fueled simply for the desire for military glory, the attractive rainbow that rises in showers of blood. So a lot of Americans are kind of fearful about what's going to happen in the aftermath here, especially Northerners. If we go back to our map for just a second, right? This territory, kind of close to Texas, well, a lot of Americans are thinking that'll be easy for Southern slave owners to start moving out into, that they're going to have the first shot at all this territory. And in the end, slavery is going to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So there's a lot of issues kind of wrapped up into this, right? There's a lot of Americans feel that this war was kind of an engineered war, that we took advantage of Mexico to just kind of spur on our dreams of growth and expanding our nation, that we didn't do it the right way. It wasn't, a war of liberation by any stretch of the imagination. It was one where we just took what we wanted. But I think Ralph Waldo Emerson, famous poet of the 19th century. He's one of these transcendentalists, one of these people that's trying to figure out what's the best way for human beings to live, right? He's kind of involved in a lot of these utopian communities that are popping up in the North at the time, where they're trying to find, the right type of society that fosters everybody's abilities, right? Gives everybody opportunity. He kind of summed up best what this victory for the United States meant, right? He said in one of his writings, the United States will conquer Mexico at the beginning of this war, but it will be as the man who swallows the arsenic which brings him down in turn. Mexico will poison us. Now, he doesn't mean that in literal terms, right? He's not afraid of people from Mexico coming in and poisoning the water supply anywhere. What he's saying is very much what Thomas Corwin is saying. Because there's so much territory here, because there's so much decisions to make as to what kind of states these are going to be, that we're going to start fighting about this now. Northerners, a lot of them, are kind of against this war, thought it was a bad idea. They thought it was really just for Southerners so they can get more territory to expand slavery. And a lot of Northerners, while they're not abolitionists, they're definitely saying, hey, look, don't want the problem to get worse here. Now, of course, the flip side is also happening. A lot of Southerners see this as an opportunity to expand slavery. They very much understood that when Texas and other territories were taken from Mexico, that opened the door to expand slavery. Ralph Waldo Emerson is trying to point out that now we have to deal with that. Who gets those territories? Are they going to be free states or slave states? It's getting harder and harder to keep the balance. Sometimes you get 3 or 4 free states ready to come in. Southerners don't want that to happen. Then you get times where Texas is ready to come in. There's no free state, and Northerners don't want that to happen. Well, Emerson's saying that is going to happen over and over again. And now that politics is becoming driven by regional interests, you're going to have people saying, we want what's good for us, and others saying, no, we want what's good for us. And it'll be harder and harder to compromise on that, right? And this idea that this is happening, right? It shows up in a couple of ways here. Start with this. The one member of the Massachusetts Assembly, right, which is a very kind of liberal, kind of northern area, right? Massachusetts is the heart of this industrial revolution in the United States. But a member of the Massachusetts Assembly, who very much on the side of the abolitionist cause, right? Inspired by people like William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper to kind of oppose slavery. He kind of says, he summed it up this way when the war was announced coming out of Congress, that such a war of conquest, so hateful in its objects, so wanton, unjust, and unconstitutional in its origin and character, must be regarded as a war against freedom, against humanity, against justice, against the Union, against the Constitution, and against the free states. So a lot of Northerners are starting to kind of point this out, saying, hey, look, when we expand slavery, we're not expanding freedom and economic opportunities. We're actually doing just the opposite. We're expanding the fight against freedom, against justice, right? And of course, we're going to bring up this horrible question of what kind of states are we going to have? Even happened during the war, as a matter of fact, right? One congressman, John Wilmot of Indiana, I believe, he proposed in 1846 when the war starts that, okay, fine, if we're going to go to war, Wilmot says, let's pass a bill that says if we're going to war, it's not to expand slavery. Now, of course, a lot of Northerners liked it. And they said, yeah, okay, let's prove that this war isn't about expanding slavery, that it's not about giving white Southerners a chance to become rich white Southerners. Of course, Southerners hated it. But the important thing here is the Wilmot Proviso kept passing in Congress, in the House of Representatives. It tells us that when Northerners want something, they can pass it over Southerners' objections. Southerners voted against the proviso. Most Northerners voted for it, and it passed. Where it doesn't pass, however, is the Senate. Because it's balanced, there couldn't be a clear winner. And because there's no clear winner, when there's a tie in the Senate, the vice president gets to break the tie. Well, the vice president, since almost the beginning of this country, has almost always been a slave owner, right? And that's true in Polk's administration as well. The vice president is always a slave owner who always kind of sides with, or almost always is a slave owner who sides with the interests of the South. Right now, Van Buren and others were kind of exceptions to this. But for the most part, about 80% of our vice presidents, that was their kind of job, was to kind of protect Southern interests, to make sure that laws didn't pass the Senate narrowly that Northerners wanted and Southerners didn't. And that's what happens with the Wilmot Proviso. But it kind of points out this division that's starting to happen, how this issue of slavery is starting to dominate American politics. Northerners are starting to want politicians that represent kind of, maybe not abolition, but stopping the spread of slavery. Southerners feel that they need to keep expanding slavery, because if you can stop the spread of slavery, well, then you can also get rid of it as well. And some of this is going to come out in this next phase that happens right after the war with Mexico. No sooner the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo signed and kind of made official than we're going to have a presidential election. And James K. Polk is popular for the most part, but he's still not the overwhelming hero that you would think, right, from such a successful presidency. He was never popular to begin with. He narrowly won election, and although he has gotten a lot of territory and delivered on those promises, he did it in such a way that it really kind of rubbed a lot of Americans, especially Northerners, the wrong way. So he knew he wasn't really going to get a chance to run for president again, and actually he was sick from cancer, I believe. So he wasn't going to get that opportunity anyways. So the door's wide open here in 1848 for a new president. The South choose, or the Democrats choose their candidate. I believe Northerner William Cass. The other side, the Whigs, choose Zachary Taylor. Well, Zachary Taylor, being a hero of the war, being somebody very familiar to a lot of Americans as they followed the progress of the war, well, the Whigs have the better candidate here, right? He's popular, he's a war hero, Americans love to make war heroes president, so he pretty easily wins this election in 1848. And another reason why Taylor, besides just kind of being a national figure, kind of this representing the whole country, a lot of the reasons why Southerners get behind him is because he owns a plantation in Louisiana and owns slaves. So they feel that they can vote for this guy because he's one of them. So in the end, the issue of what's going to happen next, what happens to all this territory, is going to be that issue is going to come up under his watch. Now, officially, Taylor doesn't really have much of a stance here, right? The Whig Party kind of learned from the Democrats in the 1844 election and tried to kind of not offend people. But Taylor, being a Southerner, most Southerners felt that they could support his presidency and not worry too much about him denying the expansion of slavery or even causing any problems on the issue of the expansion of slavery. But the thing that's going to really kind of bring all this to a head of what happens to these territories out west really isn't something that happens in the national level, right? Presidents like Zachary Taylor deciding what happens out west. It's local circumstances. One of those Americans that's lived out in the territory of California when it was part of Mexico is James Marshall. He runs a lumber mill outside of what is today Sacramento, California. And there, James Marshall, while he's kind of working on this lumber mill, kicks over some rocks in the river. They use water power to run the saws for this sawmill. And when he kicks over those rocks, he finds gold. And then he finds more. And pretty soon, because of the telegraph, when he sends out information to different groups of people that he knows that, hey, there's a lot of gold here in the rivers of California, people are going to start flooding in there. By 1849, there are hundreds of thousands of people leaving the eastern part of the United States, heading out west to get gold in California. Most of them pretty ill prepared. They're not people that have a lot of experience mining. They just want to get rich quick. They're usually young men from the lower middle class that kind of see this as their opportunity to get rich quick. But there's a problem. It takes a long time to get there, months as a matter of fact, right? It could take 6 months to sail around South America to get to the West Coast. It could take 3 to 4 months to walk across the United States, right, to get to the West Coast. So it takes a little bit of time, and that's why most of these people hit in 1849 and 1848 when news of this gold discovery first comes out. And of course, there are people from other parts of the world that are going to find out about this as well. Understandably, a lot of people in Mexico are going to be pretty upset about losing something that they had access to, but there will be people from Mexico moving into what used to be Mexico, now the United States, to try and find gold. There are going to be people coming from China, from South America, even Australia coming in, and of course, people from the southern part of the United States bringing in their slaves to help them dig gold and get rich, just like a lot of other Americans are. So here in this period, right, thousands of people come flooding into California from all over the world, really, right? All looking for the opportunity to get rich, all looking for opportunity to really make something of themselves. And at first, it looks like this is really possible, right? Little towns like San Francisco go from a few hundred people to thousands of people in just a year's time. By 1850, there's more than 25,000 people living in San Francisco, right? It's actually one of the larger cities in the United States in 1850. So this process becomes huge, right? And as people are flooding in, the people living in California have to make a decision. Now that there are so many people, more than 100,000 people in the first year of this gold discovery rush, right? What's called the gold rush to California. California now qualifies to be a state. It's barely been a territory for 11 months, and they already have enough people to qualify for admittance to the Union. And the people living in California decide, let's go ahead and do it. Let's ask to become a state. Let's determine what kind of state we're going to be and just get this done now. There's so many people pouring in. The population is growing so rapidly that this has to be answered now. So in September of 1849, they meet in Monterey, the old Mexican and Spanish capital of Northern California, in a place called Colton Hall, which you could still go visit today, right? They write the first constitution for the state of California. And in it, they do certain things. First and foremost, one of the first things they do is they ban slavery. And you got to think about that, right? Why do you ban slavery? in the gold rush. There are already some Southerners that have brought in their slaves and they're starting to work these gold deposits and get money. Why do you say no, you can't do that? Well, the simple fact of the matter is it makes it easier for them to make money, which means they get to use that money that they get from gold mining, buy more gold deposits, and start pushing people out. Exactly what's happening in the South, right? These big, rich planters that have these huge plantations, they keep buying the best land and leaving the worst land for everybody else. Well, the people living in California decide we don't want that to happen here. We don't want rich Southerners to have an unfair advantage of free labor that they own to compete against us small individuals. So what you kind of see is most of the people flooding into California, right, are coming from kind of the upper Midwest. They're coming from places like Kentucky, places like Indiana, Illinois, right? Places where they're used to kind of doing things on their own, don't rely on slave labor, don't have any slave labor at all. And they want to be able to do this on their own, to kind of make their own money, working with a few friends or individuals and making something out of themselves economically that way. They don't like the idea of somebody being able to come in, buy all the land, use slave labor, and make themselves rich and deny opportunity for everybody else. And of course, they expand on this, right? It's not just that they're going to ban slavery. They're going to make it illegal for people coming from China to own these gold deposits. They're going to make it illegal for a lot of foreigners to own land that they can find and mine gold on. So this is very much a way to kind of control these opportunities for just certain groups of people. But we also see something else happening here, right? The fact is that they put in provisions for married women to have property rights because there's so few women out here. They don't want all these men that are moving in single, right, as single men. Maybe they don't have heirs. They don't have somebody that can take over their lands that they now have, right? It needs to be able to be transferred to somebody. Married women may not have, when their husbands die, they may not want to get remarried. They have to have some kind of rights. They also make provisions for public education, that there'll be a state university. So what we kind of see is the people meeting at this convention in California, in Monterey, to write the state constitution are primarily Northerners. They're putting in Northern ideals in here. They don't want slavery in their state. They want more women's rights, although they're not going to give full equality to women. At least they're talking about giving some rights, like many Northerners are. And of course, they're talking about public education as well, as many Northerners are. So we see California is going to be dominated by Northerners, and they push at least the facets of Southern life that they don't like, slavery, out of their constitution. So in 1850, after this news of this new convention, this new call for the state of California to be added to the Union, this becomes a big question. California has just decided on its own that it's going to be a free state. They're banning slavery like other parts of the country have. Only the other parts of the country, slavery was banned by congressional legislation, right? It was Congress that settled this. Here, it's a state doing it on its own. So we have a big question. Can just these individual territories decide for themselves what kind of states they're going to be? That is going to lead to a big controversy. We have to figure out a way forward here. We're not going to have decades to figure out, like we did with the Louisiana Purchase Territory, what kind of states they're going to be, how we're going to admit them. This is happening way faster now because of the finding of gold, the discovery of gold, and the just huge influx of people into this territory that had almost nobody in it just a couple of years earlier. So what we should take away from the last few lectures, right? Actually, the last 3 or 4 lectures, including today, is kind of keep this in mind, right? From the 1800s on, from Jefferson's presidency to Zachary Taylor's presidency, that 50 years, this country has been developing in a lot of different directions, and they're kind of unique to their regions. The North has been industrializing. The South has been focusing on agriculture, especially cotton cultivation. The West has been focusing on kind of exploiting resources, either farming or using the land, or timber, furs, now gold. And of course, as the growth of this country has skyrocketed population-wise, this growth has been happening just in more and more places, right? The West is growing incredibly quickly here. And as we add more territories, as we add more states, we come back to this one issue over and over again. It's not the issue of whether we should add territory. All Americans can agree on that. What they can't agree on anymore by the 1840s is what kind of states they should add. Northerners more and more are calling for all these territories to be free territories. Southerners, of course, want to keep expanding their cotton system with its use of slave labor, so they want them to be slave territories. And they can't both be true. So the South and the North are very much splitting up the West here. And you have to make a decision in the 1840s and 1850s. What side are you on? Whose side are you on? It's getting harder and harder to find a middle ground. What we're going to see in our next lecture is they're going to try, right? For the next few years, they're going to try and avoid this situation as much as they can. They're going to do what the Whigs have done over the last couple of elections. They'll try to ignore this issue of what kind of territories these should be, free or slave. They'll come up with a compromise in 1850. They'll try to fill it out, try to fulfill it, and try to smooth over these differences between the North and the South. But what we're going to find is over and over again, these differences are just too great. They're too fundamentally different now that they can't both happen at the same time like they could 20, 30 years earlier. And that in the end, neither side wants to compromise as much anymore. The South wants what it wants, the North wants what it wants, and they're not really willing to give in a lot to the other side. So we're going to kind of pick up these issues in the thing called the Compromise of 1850. We're going to see how that infects the politics of the period of the 1850s and how it sets us up for a thing called the American Civil War. All right? So until then,